February 14th, 1929. 7 men were shot dead in a garage on the north side of Chicago. It made the front page of every major newspaper in the country, and it scared the federal government badly enough that 5 years later, they passed the first major gun law in American history, the National Firearms Act. January 17th, 1920. That's the day the United States made alcohol illegal. Not regulated, not taxed, plain illegal. What that actually meant in practice, especially in a city like Chicago, was that the government had just handed organized crime the most profitable business opportunity in American history. People still wanted to drink, and someone was going to supply that. In Chicago, that someone was the Outfit. Al Capone is probably the most recognizable name in American crime history. Most people think they know who he was, but most people are only about half right. By the late 1920s, Capone's organization controlled the south and west sides of the city. Bootlegging, gambling, prostitution, you name it. Hundreds of millions of dollars, by some estimates, running through his operation each year. But he wasn't hiding. He went to baseball games. He even sat in the front row. The city basically tolerated him because he was good at what he did, and he kept things relatively in order. And he had enough important people on his payroll that nothing ever stuck. The north side of the city was a different story. George Bugs Moran operated the North Side Gang, Capone's main competition for control of the bootlegging market. Two organizations had been at war for years, and by 1929, it got personal. There were bombings, drive-bys, and at least one attempt on Capone's life, and multiple attempts on Moran's. But neither of them had managed to win, so Capone decided to try something different. Valentine's Day, 1929. 10:30 in the morning. Moran's crew was lured into a garage on North Clark Street under the pretense of a business deal. A hijacked shipment of whiskey available for cheap. The garage was the North Side Gang's distribution headquarters. 7 men were in the garage. A mechanic, some of Moran's regulars, his second in command, and an optometrist who just enjoyed hanging out with them. 4 more men walked in. 2 of them were wearing police uniforms. Moran himself was running late, and on the way there, he saw what looked like police outside, so he kept walking. The 7 men did exactly what you'd expect if cops suddenly walked in on you in a bootlegger's garage. They turned around and faced the wall. It was the last decision 6 of them would ever make. 2 Thompson machine guns, a shotgun, and approximately 70 rounds later, 6 of the 7 men were shot to death. It was over in seconds. The 7th, Frank Gussenberg, was still breathing when police arrived, suffering from 14 bullet wounds. After arriving at the hospital, a detective named Sweeney sat with him and asked him who was responsible. Frank looked right at him and said, "Nobody shot me." 3 hours later, he died. One of the victims, a mechanic named John May, had brought his German Shepherd to work that morning. When police arrived, they found it chained to a truck inside the garage, howling. The dog's name was Highball. Bugs got the news a few hours later, and when asked if he thought Capone was behind it, he said, "Only Capone kills like that." But Capone was in Miami when it happened, sitting by a pool. He made sure of that. He was never charged, never even officially named as a suspect, but everyone knew who was truly responsible. Chicago had been tolerating organized crime for years at this point. People knew, officials knew, but 7 men lined up against a wall and executed, that was different. And the public reaction was loud. So loud, it reached Washington. Up until this point, crime was largely considered a local problem, something for city police and state prosecutors to handle. But the Valentine's Day Massacre got a lot of people in the federal government to ask a different type of question. Not just who's responsible, but what do we do about the guns? The federal government had been largely hands-off on crime up until this point. Not because they didn't care, but because the constitutional argument for federal involvement in local crimes wasn't clear. But guns were different. The Commerce Clause gave Congress something to work with, and the political will, after years of front-page massacres, was finally there. In 1934, 5 years after the Valentine's Day Massacre, Congress passed the National Firearms Act. It was the first major federal gun legislation in American history. The NFA created a registry of specific categories of firearms and accessories, that the federal government considered particularly dangerous: machine guns, short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, suppressors. If you wanted to own one legally, you had to register it, pay a tax, and be approved. The original $200 tax stamp? That's from 1934. And $200 in 1934 was roughly the equivalent to about $4,000 in today's money. And although it was legally a tax, it was really meant to be a de facto ban for the average person to own these items. The weapon that did most of the work in that garage was the Thompson submachine gun. The Thompson has been in the civilian market since 1919. Auto-Ordnance, the company that made it, originally marketed it to farmers and ranchers. That didn't pan out the way they hoped. By the 1920s, it was the preferred weapon of pretty much every organized crime unit in the country. It was powerful, reliable, and you could walk into your local hardware store and buy one. No paperwork, no background check, no waiting. What a time to be alive. Unless you were in a gang, of course. The NFA didn't ban the Thompson outright, but it required registration and a tax that put it out of reach for most people. And it defined machine gun in federal law for the first time. As for Capone, he was never charged for the Valentine's Day Massacre, not even a single murder, despite ordering, by most historical accounts, dozens of them. What ultimately got him was taxes. In 1931, 2 years after the massacre, the federal government convicted Capone of tax evasion. He was sentenced to 11 years. He served 7.5, and by the time he got out, syphilis had affected his brain to the point where he wasn't capable of running much of anything. He retired to his estate in Florida and died in 1947. Bugs Moran, on the other hand, outlived him by 11 years, but later died in prison, serving time for a bank robbery. Neither of them had a great second act. The building at 2122 North Clark Street was demolished in 1967. The city couldn't keep it. People kept coming to take bricks as souvenirs. The owner eventually tore it down just to make it all stop. It's just a plot of grass now next to a parking lot. There's nothing left to mark what happened. But the law it helped create, the NFA, still governs what you can own, how you register it, and what the whole process looks like, which is a strange kind of legacy for 7 men in a garage on Valentine's Day. So, that's basically the origin of the NFA. It wasn't just some random law that appeared out of nowhere. A lot of it traces back to one morning in one garage and a dog named Highball that somehow survived the whole thing. I made a couple other videos going through the Form 1 process, like how to register a suppressor or an SBR through the eForms website. So if that's something you're interested in, I'll have those linked down below. When you're going through the process of creating an SBR or purchasing one or a suppressor, I just think it's important to understand what you're actually participating in and why it exists in the first place. But I appreciate you sticking around, and I hope you found this interesting. Thanks for watching. Bye.